then I started realizing, well, there's a lot of cults that are popping up, right? Like Hollywood has a lot of cults, a lot of different.
Was there a specific shift that happened in Hollywood where it went from like, we're going to use James Bond, superhero, America's great, to like, no, we're going to start diving in some of this more occult imagery?
And his papers were about then chemicals actually changing gender in men and women in the future. He's like, we can do this.
A-listers who are immersed in Hollywood
Are spies.
are verified spies for America. Is that your mind having a chemical trip, or do you think it's actually opening you up to a spirit realm? I only ask for Alex Jones, one, because your connection. I have a buddy whose daughter was at Sandy Hook when it happened. And so hearing anyone say like this wasn't real, when I know people directly connected, I was like, man, it's a bad look for anyone to be propagating this.
Ruslan.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am with someone that is known to many as a Renaissance man. I think he might be a savant with the amount of books and amount of study he's done. We're talking about his new book, Esoteric Hollywood, #3. We got #2 right here. This is going to be a fun podcast. Jay Dyer, thanks for being here, man.
Absolutely, man.
Can you pull the mic up a little bit closer to you?
Absolutely. Glad to be here. Glad that stoking some drama with you led to a podcast.
We'll get into that. Man, thanks for being here, bro. You're all the way from Nashville.
We did. Yeah, we came from Tennessee. It was a long drive. Saw a lot of weird, interesting things in California. California's a weird place.
Is it?
Glad to be back. It's more weird than Nashville, but Nashville's getting more and more weird
because everyone's coming there from California.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So we're becoming California.
Man, I know you primarily from the debate stuff, and I know you've done some other stuff that's kind of loosely connected to, I don't want to use the word conspiracy, but I don't know how else to describe it, right? And then you're like this onion where like I peeled away and I went deeper on some of your stuff. And this Esoteric Hollywood series is really interesting, which I want to get into. I'm a big film guy. You talk about Inception. You talk about some of my favorite movies. So I'm like really excited to talk to you about that. But before we get into that, for folks who don't know anything about Jay Dyer, give us a little background, where you're from, your story.
Yeah, I'm from the Bible Belt. I grew up in Tennessee, small town in the middle of nowhere. But my dad entered the military, so we moved out here to San Diego. So I lived here for a lot of my youth. We moved back to Tennessee for high school.
Okay.
So in high school, I was a pretty wild party dude, and then started getting into Christianity about my senior year. So I read the Bible cover to cover my senior year and started going to Bible studies. Got invited to a bunch of different Protestant churches. I was raised Baptist, but never really took it very serious. But then I got interested in theology pretty hardcore. Went to a Bible college for a couple of years. Didn't finish it because I was no longer convinced of Baptist theology at Bible college, and I was at a Baptist school. And they actually caught me drinking a beer at a restaurant one time.
They kicked you out
Yeah,
for drinking a beer?
Well, they said either you can leave or you find another school and leave, or you're going to pay double tuition, because I got like a Baptist discount rate. So
because you were Baptist.
Yeah. So, but
Baptists don't drink, typically, folks who don't know.
Yeah. So at this Southern Baptist Theological Seminary Bible College, it's called Boyce Bible College. They gave me an ultimatum. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll go be a Presbyterian then. So,
okay.
It was all over beer. No, I'm just joking.
So you start. What made you go from like I'm kind of casual in my faith to like I'm going to take it seriously? I'm going to start going to Bible college.
So being super wild party dude, I had a really bad acid trip, and I'm not one of those people that like God spoke to me on my acid trip. It wasn't like that, but I did have a pretty bad experience. It was like a very jarring bad trip when I was 17. And that's what kind of got me interested just in like spirituality and good and evil and kind of philosophical questions. So I started reading the Bible at that point, and that's what got me into going to Bible studies, going to, different Protestant churches. I didn't know what church I was going to be affiliated with, because I wasn't really convinced of Baptist. And I had a time period where I went to some charismatic churches because I read the book of Acts and I was like, well, it looks like they're doing that stuff. So
where are my Avenger powers?
Exactly. Yeah. So I had a phase of that.
Yeah.
But then I realized like, well, if I wanted to choose a church, I probably should learn some church history.
Sure.
And so I thought the best avenue for that would be Bible college.
Okay.
So still being technically a Baptist, I went to Boyce Bible College for a while, and then I went to a different it was an unaccredited seminary, Bahnsen Seminary, actually out here in California.
Okay.
So I don't know if you know who Greg Bahnsen is, but he was like a really famous apologist for Presbyterianism, Calvinist apologist, debated all the atheists back in the 80s and 90s, was really good. So I went to Bonson Seminary for about a year. And then I started doubting Protestantism. So that took me into a totally different direction. But
so you go from kind of casual, sounds like mainline Baptist, sounds fairly strict in terms of no alcohol. That's
well, I didn't know. It was just the Bible college had that policy.
Okay.
So,
Gotcha.
Most Southern Baptists have in the past had a no alcohol policy, but this Bible college was strict on that.
Got it.
And so, plus I was arguing with everybody about theology. So I think they were looking for a way to like.
You were that guy.
Like, maybe he needs to. Because I was wondering about like infant baptism or believers baptism. And so anyway, but I ended up moving on to just different places. And
so you go from Baptist, Presbyterian, kind of more Calvinist leaning, getting more into church history, and then where do you land after that?
So I had a professor at Bonson Seminary who was a church history professor, and he's assigned this massive amount of church fathers and church history. So I read all of that, and then I was just in this quandary, and I was like, well, what about the canon of Scripture? What about the sacraments? This kind of stuff. So I decided I was going to have to read Augustine himself because I'd not yet read him. I'd only read...
Because the Calvinists love Augustine.
I know, right? Yeah. So I was like, I got to go see what he actually says.
Right.
So I read all of City of God at Bible college. And then I read against the Donatists and against the Pelagians, his anti-Pelagian writings. So I was becoming more and more convinced of like a high view of the sacraments, that kind of stuff.
You felt like in the circles you were in, there wasn't a high view of like communion and baptism?
No, because
yet?
I was in a hardcore like Westminster Confession.
Interesting.
Calvinist church, right?
Okay.
So they had a pretty... I mean, amongst Calvinists, it can differ, but my pastor happened to be pretty low church.
Okay. So you read Augustine, which is interesting because Augustine, from my understanding, is he was like a North African dude, right? Mm-hmm. So for folks who are like, Christianity is a white man religion, it's like, well, everyone kind of loves Augustine, Protestants, Catholics.
Yeah, and he's Numidian.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if he was half black, half white or what, but I mean, he was definitely ethnic
to say the least.
Yeah. But I loved his theology. And so, and I went beyond that. I read like on Christian doctrine. I read a lot of the sermons. I bought the Church Father set, basically, is what happened. That big 38 volume Philip Schaff set.
You read all of that?
No, I just started plumbing through Augustine.
Okay. Right? Just Augustine, and then you went to the rest. Got it.
Well, no, I didn't even read any Eastern Fathers. I was just like, I don't know about that.
Okay.
So I read Jerome, and then I read Ambrose. So I went heavy into that because I was trying to figure it out, like with this professor who I had. And we ended up having this big confrontation because he was like, you can't believe this and that. And I'm like, well, but you're assigning me to read all the guys that do believe that. Anyway, long story short, that led to me starting to read Aquinas and starting to read a bunch of Catholic stuff. So when I was 23, I became Catholic.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was Catholic throughout most of my 20s.
Okay. And you're like all in Catholic.
Yeah, I was like,
all in.
I went to inquire about monastic life.
Okay.
And then I realized all the dudes there, including the guy who's in charge of it, they're all Skittles, shall we say?
Okay.
I was like...
You could tell that just from...
Oh, it was obvious.
It was obvious.
But I had other people telling me in the traditional Catholic circles, like, if you go that route, they're all Skittles.
Interesting.
As well known, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
I've had Father Simon on, who's a Catholic priest, who's local, and I connected with another one. I didn't get that vibe.
Well, I'm talking about
monastic
the
stuff.
Dominicans specifically,
Got you.
Because I was really into Aquinas.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, he was a Dominican, so I'll just check this out.
Got it.
Went and met with the diocese spiritual advisor dude. I was like, no, I'm good.
You're good. Okay. And so Calvinist to Catholic. And you're all in. Were you starting to do Catholic apologetics or not really?
I did, yeah.
You did.
It was Catholic apologetics that got me interested because my hero was Bonson.
Okay.
And he debated a famous Catholic apologist who kind of was best friends with Scott Hahn. You probably heard of Scott Hahn.
A little bit.
And that was like, there was this wave of people that left Calvinism in the 90s for Catholicism. And that was like Matitix and Scott Hahn. And I liked all those guys, read all those guys. So I read Scott Hahn's book, and then I got into Jerry Matitix's stuff. And he beat Bonson in a debate. So for me, that was kind of like a crushing moment because...
Were these written debates or what kind of debates?
No, audio.
Audio, okay.
Yeah, you can still find them.
Find them.
Yeah, Bonson versus Matitix. They debated canon of Scripture and they debated Mary. Like the high view, low view of Mary. So
Yeah. I should go back and check some of that out. That's
I can probably find those.
Yeah.
I think I know they're on Word MP3. I don't know if they're on YouTube or not, but anyway.
Got it.
So that was me when I was like 20, 21, 22. I was like just trying to weed out all this stuff and reading all these books. I had a job, by the way, that made it really easy for me to just sit and read all day.
Yeah.
So
what was your job?
a paint mixer.
A paint mixer?
Yeah.
Okay. You
managed a paint
literally
shop.
watching paint dry mixer?
Mixing. No. So like, it's funny because my last name's Dyer. And so there had to be some kind of providential connection.
God has
like
a sense of humor. Yeah.
Dying the past. So for 10 years, I was a paint store manager, paint mixer. But like I'd say from like, because all the painters are drunks, right? So they come in at like first thing in the morning hungover.
Yeah.
And then nobody comes in the paint store until like 4 in the afternoon. So you have like a whole day to just sit and read.
Very blue collar of you.
It was, yes. I'm going to have to put on some jeans.
You got to put on jeans. Canadian tuxedo like Zach Sparazzo. Okay. Now, did you ever go down the route of the, what is the Catholics that don't like the Second Vatican Council? Is that
I went progressively hardcore Tradcat. So when I became Catholic in 2003, I went to the regular church.
It's like Mel Gibson vibes, right?
I eventually went there.
Yeah, okay.
But that took 10 years.
Okay.
So like, or 9 years. I went to the regular like Novus Ordo down the road church. But then somebody handed me some information about the Latin Mass. So I started reading a lot of traditional Catholic stuff. So within a few years, I was going to the Society of St. Pius X's Latin Mass for the next almost decade.
Now, the church you were going to, are they in communion with Rome, or are they considered schismatic?
The first church I went to was just normal
Catholic
church.
Yeah.
And then I got more and more trad and went to the Memphis SSPX chapel, which they're in this weird status where like they will say the name of the Pope in the Mass and the liturgy, but Rome considers them in this like halfway, not full communion status. So they've been arguing with Rome for the last 20 years.
And the theory there is that they changed the order of communion around the Second Vatican Council. Am I trying correctly?
It's a lot of things. It's like the SSPX would take issue with the Novus Ordo Mass itself. They would take issue with the ecumenism of Vatican II, the statements of Vatican II about Muslims and Christians worshiping, all that kind of stuff. So they would take issue with all that. So for the SSPX, like Vatican II is a tricky issue because the popes have obviously taught it and confirmed it. They don't like it. They want to reject it. So it's this really weird kind of halfway position.
Interesting. Okay. So then from there, you go from Catholic to Eastern Orthodox? Is that when it changed?
Yeah, well, so in 2007, I started doubting Catholicism, 2008, 9, right? And, these things are not black and white. Like you have phases of where you like doubt something. And then so I started reading Eastern Church Fathers.
Okay.
And at the time, I was dating a girl who we were both going to be Orthodox and get married. So we went through the catechumenate, but I was still very Thomistic, very Augustinian. So I just wasn't ready to convert to Orthodoxy. So I just held off.
Okay.
And just
But you were going to Eastern Orthodox Church?
Yeah, we did the whole year of like, we did the whole catechumenate in 2008. And then when it came time to be chrismated and received in the Orthodox Church, I was like, I'm just not ready to do this.
Okay.
So I held off.
Okay.
So
did you go back to Catholic?
A little bit, but then I just kind of like was just in limbo.
Okay.
So I didn't do anything.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to go back to the Novus Ordo. I didn't believe the Tradcat stuff anymore.
Okay.
But I wasn't convinced of Orthodoxy. So I was just in a kind of a limbo state.
In a limbo state. Was any moment in your journey, there's like some sort of crisis of faith in general? Like I'm not even sure about all of this.
Yeah, no, I had a period where like I was like not sure about. I was never atheist, but I was like maybe Christianity isn't true. So I read Perennialists, I read Neoplatonists. I was interested in all that stuff.
Is this around the same time you're working on your philosophy degree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is finishing up undergrad, and then about the time of starting grad school around 2011, 12, 13. Yeah.
Would you say you were like a theist at that point, a deist? What would you have?
No, I would say like maybe Platonism, Neoplatonism. Like I thought there was definitely a God. I never doubted God's existence, but I was like, well, maybe it's Unitarian, maybe it's not Trinity. Okay. Right. So then what got me back in that direction was I started reading St. Maximus the Confessor around 2013. And then I read, I was like, I'm going to go back and reread the Bible. So I went back through the entire scriptures. And I noticed a lot of stuff I'd never noticed. I mean, I was always really interested in biblical theology, but rereading it from the lens and the vantage point of the Eastern Church Fathers was something that I think was a momentous change in my views.
Okay.
So, because at that time I'd read not just Maximus, but I read a lot of the Cappadocians, like Basil and Gregory. And so, yeah, I was like, all right, I guess now all the Thomistic baggage that I kind of had like stuck in my head kind of washed away. And I went back to just divine revelation scriptures. And it was like seeing it through new eyes, I guess.
And so then you go back to at that point you have to go start the catechumen process all over again, or
I did read,
you have to start the whole thing?
I did.
And what is that process like? Because like we're seeing Apostate Prophet, I guess he's in the process of catechumenism. Hopefully I said that right. What does that entail? And it's a year, which I think is good. I think like give people a year to sort this thing out. What was that process like?
Pretty flexible depending upon who your priest is. Like they will kind of make that decision based on where they think you are. So they might do 6 months or they might do 3 years. So Orthodoxy is pretty selective. Like they're not, it's not like Baptist or anything else, or even Catholic, right? Catholic RCA is like a few months. So no, it's like I think mine was about 8 months, 6 to 8 months.
And are you not allowed to do communion during that part? They're not giving
you don't commune, but you are expected to attend regularly. And I think it's just kind of like, is this person serious?
Yeah.
You know, so.
I'm assuming there's some discipleship that's happening with the priest and like one-on-one time and reading and stuff like that. How intensive is that part, I guess?
I mean, it wasn't intensive for me because I was used to reading theology all the time.
Yeah.
I think if you are not used to theology, it might be a little intensive because you probably have to read a couple books max. You're going to be going through at least a year, usually a year of the church's liturgical cycle to get you used to the feasts. And in Orthodoxy, like the liturgy is kind of the Bible theology in action. So you're getting biblical theology through the services, and you go through most of the scriptures within a year. So,
in terms of the Sunday morning liturgy, you're covering a lot of scriptures.
And any of the other services like Vespers that you can, like they will encourage you to come to as many as you can.
How many would you say you were coming to as you're going through the process of becoming a catechumen?
For me, because we lived about an hour from church, it was just Sunday stuff.
Okay.
And then part of the time I was in Florida, so I was doing going to a different Orthodox church, but doing my catechesis still through my Tennessee priest.
Got it.
So,
and at this time, are you kind of finishing up your undergrad? Are you still doing your undergrad?
No, by this is like 2016, 17. Okay. I've already left academia. Like I quit in 2013, I think.
Okay.
And so I was already doing like a blog and podcast and doing that full time.
Yeah.
But was received in the church, I think, in 2017.
Officially in 2017.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so around the same time, you finish your degree in, was it philosophy and literature?
I did my undergrad, in philosophy and history, and then I started grad school focusing on psychological warfare in film and how symbolism is used to propagandize in pop culture.
Okay.
So I was doing my grad work on that, was doing a grad thesis on that, and how James Bond is used in the Cold War.
Right.
For that. So that's what kind of got me in this mode of writing a lot about film.
Yep.
And that's what my blog started out. It was just like Hollywood movie symbolism. That was it. And then it expanded into other topics and things that I was interested in, just because I was like, I can't just talk about movies all the time. It drives me crazy. It's too monotonous.
Yeah.
So, I'd write essays about philosophy, and then I'd write an essay about geopolitical stuff. And then eventually that led to a book, and then it led to accidentally actually debates, which was not something I ever had planned to do.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was all accidental.
Yeah. So you got 2 books that are out, Esoteric Hollywood Part 2, and then the third one's coming out this July.
Yeah, and a philosophy book. So I got
philosophy books. And you go from writing about this stuff as an undergrad into on your master's to really picking apart the symbolism. But from your perspective, it sounds like, if I'm tracking correctly, the symbols weren't just used as propaganda for the Cold War. They sound like they become more darker in some of these films, where we're now dealing with full-on occult stuff.
Right.
Was there a specific shift that happened in Hollywood where it went from like, we're going to use James Bond, superhero, America's great, to like, no, we're going to start diving in some of this more occult imagery?
Yes, I would say after the 60s counterculture revolution, you have some avant-garde filmmakers who were self-professed Satanists, like Kenneth Anger. They were very into Crowley. He's a famous Skittles avant-garde like icon of.
By the way, I just want to say I love Skittles. We're taking that. We usually say LGTV because all of our TVs are LGTV. Skittles is brilliant. Keep going. I'm sorry.
And Anger was like in the circles of the Rolling Stones and hanging out with like people from the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey, that kind of stuff. Which I know that's not theistic Satanism; it's just kind of atheism with
it's like they're like trolling
costumes. Yeah,
yeah.
But there are sides and groups that do take it seriously.
Yeah.
And
or they start kind of trolling, and then all of a sudden, we had Shane Smith on, and that was his journey. He was like, "Oh, just kind of playing around and being silly," and then it's like, "No, we're full on dabbling with witchcraft and dark forces." Yeah.
And I kind of inadvertently found that interesting through the grad work, like studying Hollywood and symbolism, and then I started realizing, well, there's a lot of cults that are popping up, right? Like Hollywood has a lot of cults, a lot of directors, a lot of A-listers. They're tied into cults. And many of them are working for intelligence. Like they work for the CIA, they work for the FBI. Some of the most famous A-listers have been OSS operatives, FBI informants, and CIA operatives. So
in Hollywood.
Yeah. Some of the most famous A-listers on record. It's declassified. So the third book has a whole chapter on people like Sterling Hayden. It was declassified. That
A-listers who are immersed in Hollywood
are spies.
Are verified spies. For America, for our side, or for okay, I was going to say that would be really crazy.
Right. Well, the belief was that a couple of them were
double agents. Yeah.
So like, for a long time, Marlene Dietrich was suspected of being a spy for Tiny Mustache Man.
And so, how famous are these folks? Are these like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson
these are
famous?
Like, these are A-listers of that time, right? So
and they're verified spies.
Well, she was suspected of being a Tiny Mustache Man spy.
Okay.
And so the FBI and the U.S. intelligence like investigated her and had files on her, but it turns out she was actually trying to spy for the OSS, which is the CIA's predecessor in America.
Interesting.
Yeah, Sterling Hayden was a verified OSS agent operative.
When you say verified, how verified are we talking?
No, he actually wasn't.
Like we can go to CIA's website and it's
yes,
declassified.
Declassified. Yeah, National Archives. Yeah, declassified.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cary Grant was an informant. He spied on because they thought Errol Flynn was a Tiny Mustache Man spy. So they asked Cary Grant to like inform on people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now when you say spies, is it kind of like, hey, you're famous, so you get a knock on a door from the CIA, and when you go over to do this press tour, we want you to keep an eye on stuff? Or are they like CIA operatives who were trained?
Both.
Both.
It can be both. I think in Cary Grant's case, he was just asked to spy and inform. Jimmy Stewart, right? The most famous like A-lister of his time. He actually was like, he worked for the FBI. He made FBI propaganda movies. You can go watch his FBI movies. In fact, Laurel Canyon, which is a famous movie studio, if you drive up Wonderland Avenue on Mulholland Drive, you get to the top and there's a giant Air Force studio that was like the preeminent studio of its time. I think I have it covered in the first chapter of the first book. All of the A-listers had Department of Defense badges that gave them access to this secret studio that the Air Force owned. So there's a clear connection right there. In fact, Marilyn Monroe had a badge, like a DOD badge. So a lot of these people are actually recruited to also do varying levels of spy work.
And so in that, it sounds like as there is the rise of the hippie revolution, the sex revolution, all this sort of stuff, it goes from, hey, we're just kind of fighting this Cold War, keeping an eye on our enemies, pushing American propaganda, to now there's this countercultural
and darker stuff.
And darker stuff is rising up. Would you say that was calculated and intentional, or would you say that all of a sudden the people who are the artists and the creatives are going down this in their own worldview, and so it starts seeping into the media?
A degree of both. You can look at things like the S.D.N.Y Institute, which was pushing kind of the think tank behind the whole counterculture New Age movement of the 60s. And S.D.N.Y was promoted by very powerful, wealthy people. You can look it up, and they've had all the most famous kind of New Agey people go and speak there over the years. Deepak Chopra, Aldous Huxley, they've all promoted all that stuff from S.D.N.Y, which is, up Big Sur. If you just drive up Big Sur, there's a S.D.N.Y up there.
Yeah. But Deepak Chopra had like an office out here in Encinitas, I think. Yeah, he has a pretty big footprint here locally. Yeah.
So all that stuff was supported from the top down, but a lot of the people in that counterculture, maybe not the mainstream, but many of them were into that avant-garde, like satanic type stuff. not so much LaVey, but more so Crowley, who was pretty serious about his Satanism. And he was a British spy too, by the way.
Wow.
Yeah. He worked for MI5. And Crowley is kind of the forefather, not just of yoga in the West with Madame Blavatsky, but the sexual revolution. So the 60s counterculture stuff owes its ethos actually to Aleister Crowley, and many of the people in the 60s counterculture, like Dr. Tim Leary, who worked for the CIA on record, he called himself the new Aleister Crowley because his idea was we can really revolutionize the culture, not just through drugs, but also through sex. So sex and drugs. And so Hollywood played a key role in that in the 60s, and a lot of the counterculture people coming out of the Laurel Canyon scene were also directly connected to intelligence.
What was the motive behind it? Like, why do you think they wanted to create this countercultural or kind of hedonistic, weird, new agey thing driven by sex and all this stuff, drugs and
so some of the people who were Fabian socialist technocrats had already talked about this strategy and this plan in the 1920s and 30s. So Bertrand Russell talked about it. He was a very open, he lived in a pan polycule relationship before anyone else did. H.G. Wells was a famous, everybody knows him for like War of the Worlds, but he also wrote all these mainline geopolitical books like Open Conspiracy, New World Order. That's from him. It's his book. And in those books, he describes how they would revolutionize Western civilization through counterculture, through sexual revolution, to make the West more amenable to a future socialist technocracy. So that's explicitly what's in those books.
So they're playing the long game.
Yeah.
They're thinking
that's the Fabian,
generations ahead.
Fabian model is the slow, it's their symbol's a turtle and a wolf in sheep's clothing. So that's a slow burn model. Boiling frog.
Isn't there some crossover with some of this and the postmodernist and the folks who are into critical theory?
Yes.
The French philosophers that were also into the PDF stuff, the PDF file stuff. And they were trying to normalize this. And for whatever reason, that didn't get normalized, but some of this other weird stuff got normalized.
You got to do it in phases, right? So if you want to get to that like extreme level, you take it in that slow burn model. Like you have one revolution, next revolution, right? Feminism worked the same way. And you couldn't have the Skittles had you not already had the feminist revolution, right? In my second book, the first chapter actually addresses what you're talking about. I talk about the deconstructionists. Do you know the CIA went and like made alliances with the French postmodernist deconstructionists?
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
For the culture war. It's called the Congress for Cultural Freedom.
It's in chapter 1. You said the aviator chapter?
No, I think it's the chapter before
introduction.
That. Yeah, I think it's in the introduction.
Okay.
You see...
The cool thing, just real quick, about this is you have citations for all this. So you're not just like winging it.
No, there's like 360 footnotes, I think.
Yeah, there's a ton of footnotes.
In the first one. I forget how many is in the second one, but yeah, that's from the academic background. It's like you got to source everything.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. I mean, when I was working on my own book, it was the same thing. It was like I would have quotes in there, and they would dig up the actual quote, not the one I thought, not the person I thought who said it. You know. So okay, so they're rolling it out in phases. They can't just jump all the way into kids Skittles. They have to be a bit more careful. Right. And then over time, but why do you think the kids Skittles thing's never caught on? Like, or is it catching on with some of this Transformer stuff today?
It is, yeah, exactly.
It is catching on now.
So, but they had to do it like in the phases.
Okay.
Right.
So today, like the would you connect it to now kids don't have to give consent or who are incapable of giving consent for anything else, but are able to make life-changing things happen to their body with drugs and stuff that like is kind of coming out as bad? Would you say that is now the let's try and alleviate consent from children because they can make would you connect those two? Does that make sense?
I would say it's the culmination of what these revolutionaries wrote about. For example, Aldous Huxley wrote not just Brave New World, but he wrote Brave New World Revisited. And in the introduction, he talks about this book is not, strictly speaking, fiction. This is what the technocratic elite actually have planned for the future. And if you go back and read Brave New World, which we just did a book club on this a few months ago with my buddy, quite frankly, I read it 10 years ago. We reread it last year. And I never even noticed the second chapter is all about pedo stuff. The World Socialist Controller mandates pedo stuff for the dystopia.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
the
dark,
second
man.
chapter. It gets really dark. I won't say what else goes on, but he actually calls himself Christ. He says, "Let the children come unto me," in the context of pedo stuff. Yeah, it's gross. But Huxley's telling you that the sexual revolution is what prepares the way for the Brave New World.
Do you think that there's been some slowdown with some of this stuff now that there seems to be a massive cultural pushback specifically against the transformer ideology?
Yeah, so all of that is spearheaded out of Tavistock. The Tavistock Institute in the UK is kind of the spearhead of, they were behind MK Ultra originally, and Huxley played a role in that because he was actually going to ORGY events with Crowley. They partied together, and Crowley wrote a book called Drug Diaries. And I did an interview with Dr. Richard Spence, who's a professor, who's kind of a historian of this stuff. He wrote a book on Crowley, and he's the one that demonstrated that Crowley was a British intelligence operative. And that's how we got linked up with Huxley, who was part of this inner clique of Fabian socialist elites, right? So when Huxley saw that Crowley had this drug diary, he was like, this might actually be an interesting study at a government level. So that became part of Tavistock. That eventually becomes MK Ultra in the US. It's the same program, but it's just different continents. And that led to the idea that you could engineer and change the human being, not just in his mind, but eventually it becomes a change of the entire physiognomy and the biology of a person. So I actually dug up in the first book, there's a chapter where I talk about papers that were written by people like Dr. Holger Hayden. He was a famous scientist who was invited to the 1969 mind control conference in San Francisco that Rockefellers put on. And it was sponsored by CIA's Voice of America. And his papers were about drugs and chemicals actually changing gender in men and women in the future. He's like, we can do this. 1969.
Wow.
Yeah, and I cite Dr. Holger Hayden's papers. You can still find them on Google Scholar if that still exists. But when I was writing the book, I was like looking up Google Scholar and finding all this stuff.
And so this stuff then starts kind of seeping into the media.
There's a white paper written in, I forget the exact date, maybe in the early 70s. It's called Changing Images of Man, and it's put out by Stanford Research Institute. And that's one of the key papers where they talked about re-engineering all of Western civilization's thoughts, not just about the environment, which is a lot of the green agenda stuff, but also man himself. And so they begin to talk about how we need to convince man that man is the problem.
Jeez.
And that's what leads to a lot of this sort of depopulation, anti-natalist type stuff.
Stuff is dark, man.
I'm just giving you the sources.
These
are all the sources.
I'm just okay, so let me ask you this way. One, does it, I asked you this offline, but like, does watching films now suck for you? Because you're looking at this through like this kind of critical lens and connecting the symbols. Like, are you able just to enjoy films?
Yeah, because like a lot of this I was doing like 10, 15 years ago when I was really watching movies from that kind of a vantage point, which I mean, I still do to a degree, but like most movies suck nowadays anyway. So they're not that good. But I mean, when I go back and watch an 80s movie, I'm not like trying to pick it apart necessarily.
Okay.
So
interesting. So let me ask you a question. So then in this way, like I think that there's something about the human story that will seep out in different aspects with regards to media, where people can infuse things unknowingly, like flawed, broken people can infuse things unknowingly that still point to something transcendent and potentially godly.
Absolutely.
Right. So like I had this conversation recently. I'm sure you've seen Coming to America. Right. So the prince doesn't want an arranged marriage. He doesn't want someone to marry them. For him, he wants to come as a regular person. So he comes, and granted the movie has, fornication and all kinds of sexual stuff. And he meets a queen. He wants to find his queen in America. So he goes to Queens, ironically enough.
Right.
And he wants a woman to love him for him while secretly having this entire royal, powerful identity. Right. And so like, I see something like that. I kind of parallel it to the story of Jesus. Like Jesus comes, doesn't come as the Messiah warrior, to establish a political kingdom. He comes as a lowly servant and wants people to love him for him instead of what they can get from him, the power they can get from him. And so I'm not saying that Eddie Murphy is a Christian writing a Christian story, but I see parts of the Christian story in a lot of media as well. How would you like process that? Like, from my vantage point?
My books are not all negative. Like there's plenty of good messages. There's plenty of good film, film analyses that we do. And like you said, like even stories of just sort of heroic virtue or natural virtues, those exist. Yeah. outside the church, outside Christianity, and those messages are fine. I think Christianity is always historically, when it encounters positives in cultures outside of the church, you elevate the positives, the virtues that are there that are natural, right? And then you just try to weed out the things that are demonic or unnatural. So there's a healthy form of enculturation, as it's called, in Christian missionary work historically. A lot of Orthodox missionaries, like St. Herman of Alaska, had the same attitude, where anything that he would find in the Inuit culture that was good, you can elevate that, and you just get rid of the idolatrous, demonic stuff.
Yeah. In our framework, maybe we would use language like reject, receive, redeem. Right. So there's certain things within culture like we just have to reject. Like you can't be a stripper for Jesus. You can't be a meth head for Jesus. You can't be a pimp for Jesus. Right. But then there's other aspects where we can redeem a genre like hip hop.
Right. Although if you go to my OnlyFans, you can see that I can pull it off.
Oh gosh.
I'm just joking.
I was gonna say, are you one of those guys that got the OnlyFans before they became explicit?
It's just me in my yoga pants. Yeah. So it's just rated PG-13.
So, but yeah, like a genre like hip hop or death metal or whatever, you can take that, you can redeem it, you can use it for God's glory. And then there's other aspects of culture where we can just receive. We can receive aspects of culture that are good stories or good food or good, right? Like those things that aren't necessarily attached to anything of the occult or
demonic,
of the demonic.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. Personal question. I didn't see you talk about Star Wars in either of these. I just glanced at the chapters. Have you went through all the Star Wars films?
We did a podcast on that some years ago.
Okay.
And kind of dissected it from an esoteric perspective. But no, that's like the one.
That's the one you haven't
big
done.
one.
Star Wars is a mixed bag, man, because there's parts of Star Wars that are like, oh, this is full on like the Force,
it's
woo-woo,
like Eastern
mysticism,
philosophy. Yeah.
But then I was watching episode 9, and the cool thing, me and my son watch it, and you saw I got the text during dinner last night, and I was like, he wants me to come home and finish episode 9 because we started it on May 4. Sorry, episode 3, and there's aspects of it that we get to discuss and be like, hey, this is not the way God is. This is not the way Jesus is. Like, God is a personal God. He's not this force, right? Though there is a good and a bad, right? And there is a realm that we don't see. Anyway, I was watching episode 3 with him, and the moment where, I don't know if you remember this, but where Anakin goes to the dark side, the Sith that's presenting to him the dark side says, the Jedi aren't telling you the full story. And the Jedi, they're wrapped up in their dogma, and their dogma doesn't allow them to fully explore how powerful the Force is, right? And so because Anakin wants to save his love from death, he keeps getting these premonitions that she's going to die,
Right.
And so he wants to save her. And the appeal is that the Jedi and the light is dogmatic, and they're bad, and they're too archaic in their understanding. And the dark side, it's more nuanced, and it's more, enlightened, and it doesn't have hardcore binaries, right? And there's more power over
It's
here.
kind of what Satan is saying in the garden,
Right?
He's like, did God really say that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I was watching that, and then I was thinking about our conversation, and I was like, oh man, I wonder what Jay would think about this, because it is. I instantly thought of the garden. I instantly thought about that lie, and then the perversion to try and escape death,
Right.
which only Jesus did, and then offers us in the resurrection.
Yeah. You don't need to ask about Star Wars. You don't need to what? So that's the one thing I didn't analyze. I'm just joking.
Part 4. Part 4 of your book, Star Wars.
It could be if we do a part 4.
Yeah.
I was going to start doing some Billy D. Williams impressions here in a minute. Hello, what have we here?
Anyway, so let's talk about the latest one. And you jumped into one of my favorite movies, which is Inception. And in your theory, Inception is pushing kind of like a Gnosticism.
Yeah.
And Cobb is always in his dream. There's theories that he ends up waking up at the end.
Right.
And then there's theories that he doesn't wake up, that meaning the end he's still in his dream. Your assessment of it is that there's a connection to Gnosticism, and that the entire thing is all one big dream.
Right. So a couple of reasons why I took that route was, I remember when I wrote that analysis, I was reading a book on Hollywood and surrealism, and a lot of film directors are influenced by surrealism, like David Lynch. And the idea of surrealism is that we have no delineator between the sleeping state and the waking state. There's no clear line to know. And so we may actually always be in a dream state. I don't believe that, but I'm saying that's what surrealists believe. And a lot of the directors in the 40s and 50s, even some of the pretty notorious and famous ones who were even connected to the Black Dahlia case, like which was a famous ritual murder case of Elizabeth Short in Hollywood. It was one of the earliest connections of Hollywood to the occult that was kind of in mainstream news. Some of those directors were really into that. And so there's kind of been a trend in some big level Hollywood people to push this idea. And I think that you could argue that Christopher Nolan and his brother are influenced very much by that and Carl Jung. Definitely when Nolan does films, he'll even in the screenplay reference Carl Jung.
Interesting.
So we get and he's definitely a Gnostic. Like I just read Jung's Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious. We did a couple podcasts on that book.
He's the guy, is he the guy who said that he knows God exists and then kind of have to walk it back? And we think about the same guy? Or that Jung?
Carl Jung is the Gnostic psychoanalyst. He's the father of psychoanalysis, right? So he was Freud's student, and he disagreed with Freud because he thought Freud was too sexual. Like it was everything was just instinctual, base drives. And Jung went in the direction of reviving Neoplatonism and Gnosticism by his own admission. Like he says, I'm a Gnostic. Right?
Is any of this have any crossover with idealism? And this idea that like everything is
just our ideas.
Where what is the there's a guy that's super popular about it. He was on Jonathan Peugeot's podcast, and his whole metaphor is that the plane is the controllers on the plane aren't really indicative of anything.
The
and
puppeteers, man.
Yeah,
it's the puppeteers.
Yeah, and so it's like this weird kind of idealistic thing of how you're perceiving life, and you're saying this, you're connecting this to Gnosticism, which is interesting.
I mean, so again, in Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, Carl Jung says, I believe and I want to revive Plato, idealism, and Gnosticism. So that's his worldview.
Why is this dangerous?
Well, for many reasons. I mean, the earliest opponents of Christianity, even in Paul's time, when he writes to Timothy, he says, Gnostics. Beware of those who claim to have knowledge or the gnosis. So Paul was warning right early on. And then in the 2nd, 3rd century, we have Irenaeus when he wrote Against Heresies in 180. The first 300 pages of that book is him just detailing like all the insane Gnostic sects that existed at that in 180, right, in the Roman Empire. So that's our earliest source for the main opponents of Christianity in the first 2 centuries were the Gnostics.
And they go on to influence the Islamic view of Jesus, right? Like the source material that Muhammad would have had access to in a region, they say would have been more Gnostic accounts.
It's funny you said that because this morning I don't know why I woke up thinking about this. I was thinking about Docetism, which is the idea that Jesus didn't really die on the cross, didn't really have a human nature. And the Quran says Allah tricked everybody into thinking
it just
that
appeared.
Jesus, that's a form of Docetism. And I was reading for a couple years ago when I was debating all these Muslims, the Oxford Handbook to Islam admits that these Arianism, Gnosticism, and Nestorianism influenced Muhammad, which is interesting because that vindicates St. John Damascus, who writing in the 7th century was one of the first to say these new rising Islamic believers are influenced by Arianism and Nestorianism. So modern scholarship has basically vindicated St. John Damascus's original analysis of this rising heresy of Islam.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is Gnostic, yeah. I mean, not totally, but elements of it.
And so from, Christopher Nolan, I think is a Catholic or went to Catholic school or something to that degree. You feel like this indirectly had a bigger driver and a bigger influence on him, specifically with Inception, than his own Catholic heritage and his own background?
Well, I think his brother does a lot of the writing, so they collab together. Okay. And like in Batman Begins, pretty sure I'm going from memory. You
explore this in a new
you have Scarecrow basically reciting his quote Jungian perspective. So one of the villains is literally saying like, "Have you not read Carl Jung? Let me tell you about the archetypes of collective unconscious." And then he talks about like the shadow archetype, and he references I think himself as the shadow archetype. And in Batman Joker, that's the same idea here. Is that when Joker's talking to Batman, he's like, I'm the other side of you, you're me, we're the same, we're flip sides of the same coin, right? And the Jungian idea is that you don't fight the vices and the demonic, you integrate the dark side into you.
Oh.
And one of the worst things that Jung wrote was a essay called Aeon, A-I-O-N. I think it's a whole book, but I only have a 5-page section of it, which is the most relevant, and it's called Antichrist, right? And in that,
it's called Antichrist.
Yeah, it's that section is arguing that Jesus and Antichrist are flip sides of the same coin. So all of us have within us a Jesus side and an Antichrist side, and you got to integrate the two together.
Ugh.
That's Jungian psychoanalysis. So it's all balance.
Is this anything about the shadow self or anything?
Yeah, that's what the shadow self. He says Antichrist is a shadow self to Christ, and they're both dialectical necessities of the other. So to have good, you got to have evil. To have evil, you got to have good, which is all occult philosophy, basically. Anyway, so that does definitely influence the ethos of the way that both Nolans approach film. For example, if you watch Westworld, I think in part 2 I did an analysis of Westworld.
Westworld was dark, man.
It was. And it's super Gnostic too.
And it was super dark.
It is, and it's Gnostic, and I covered that in there because I think Jonathan Nolan wrote Westworld. And so Tenet has some Gnostic esoteric themes.
Tenet is very confusing to keep up with the way
bizarre,
they use. Yeah, it's weird, man.
Yeah.
So this obsession with Gnosticism, like,
by the way, all Hollywood has this obsession. And there have been directors talking about, most directors are pretty obsessed with Jungian archetypes, Gnosticism. So it's like dominates Hollywood.
But there's a hedonism in Hollywood, though, that like is after pleasure, right? So it's interesting that like Gnosticism elevates the spirit world and the enlightenment and more information, while also wanting to experience more pleasure in the material, physical reality. Like it's such a perversion on both ends of the spectrum. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Right. And I mean, but it doesn't have to make sense, right? Because I mean, all of these sort of unbelieving worldviews and philosophies are going to have these kind of contradictions and tensions in them. They're not going to be coherent.
Yeah.
And even Irenaeus mentions like there's so many different Gnostic groups. Some of them were like into full-on hedonism. Some of them are into like, basically Brahmin yogi type stuff where you just roll in poop and you don't eat for a year, So there's two extremes of Gnostics. And I think the whole point is that you're accepting contradictions. You're accepting things that don't make sense.
Yeah.
In Jungianism and Gnosticism.
Well, it's such a perversion to the incarnation, right? Because
Jesus takes on matter.
Yeah, he takes on matter, physical
and
being.
They're saying matter's bad.
Yeah. Fully God, fully man, takes on matter, can experience temptation, yet overcomes it. Right? Creates a pathway for reconciliation for people. And it's such I think Gnosticism is such a nasty heresy because it's so appealing, and it definitely speaks to that pride aspect that people want of knowing more and having more information and having the right information and having all these things that it's interesting that you've connected it so well to what's happening in Hollywood.
I think it was have you ever seen Dark City?
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's got Rufus Sewell and Jennifer Connelly in it. It's a 90s pre-Matrix type of movie.
Okay.
It's a pretty good movie, but the director, I think his name is Richard Ayoade, and he was interviewed some years back. I think I put it in the third book, but he said something to the effect of like, if you want to understand Hollywood, just look at Gnosticism. Like the directors and the whole ethos is like, that's the governing ideology.
Interesting. Okay, so tell me this. And I know you're Eastern Orthodox and you don't align with what we do, but when you see stuff like The Chosen, which I'm sure you can have all kinds of issues with The Chosen, House of David, these are movies that are not movies, series that are now being made by a Dallas Jenkins, John Irwin. Amazon is looking at the uptick in Bible sales, and they're seeing that, I think last year was a record-breaking 14 million Bibles sold, many of them to new believers. So Amazon is tracking this, and then Amazon Studios is now getting behind these productions and pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into Christian stories, right? Does that give you any glimmer of hope in terms of Hollywood shifting? Because you also believe that Hollywood's dead, right? But there seems to be this shift happening in terms of the media in film, and then I would also argue in music is moving away from a lot of the stuff you're exposing in your book.
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate that and give props to it. I think Mel Gibson really kind of pioneered this with The Passion and showing that you can make, you know, movies like the way Hollywood used to make Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, which are kind of Christian movies, right? You can go back to that and be very successful. And so that kind of shows that maybe even the ethos of Hollywood is not dominated by the money and the numbers. Like, why would you keep making things, or even big companies like Disney that don't do well, to push the woke kind of agenda? So I think that demonstrates that it's not just about money. It's actually an agenda. And yeah, I think there's a lot of positive, you know, Christian films being made, Christian companies, a lot of independent films that are wholesome and coming out. And yeah, I think we could have seen that trend was coming. I mean, a lot of the, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of like the Christian streaming platform movies and stuff, but I think they're an indicator of the culture shifting.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not opposed to Christian films, but I'm just saying, like, some of their corny, like Pure Flix, like corny stuff. But.
Yeah. Well, there's one. What is the one that would just take out all the profanity and all the sketchy scenes? It's like a browser extension. Okay. I can't remember. Is it VidAngel? Yeah, VidAngel. And Pure Flix is an actual like streaming platform that I saw integrated, I think, in Amazon. Like I was on Amazon, really? And now I see Pure Flix in there, and I don't know if it's an add-on or not. So I was like, that's interesting. And then again, like knowing that they're Amazon is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on Christian media right now.
Yeah, we watched the King David thing.
What'd you think of that?
I enjoyed it.
It's good, right?
Yeah.
I thought it was great.
Yeah.
I thought it was.
I've not seen Chosen, but I don't. Yeah. I mean, I don't know much about it other than that everybody talks about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in both of those Bible shows are going to take creative license to fill in the stories, and some people have an issue with that. Other people don't have an issue with that. You know, so if they're like David, you saw David, like there's this entire backstory of David and the daughter and all this stuff, and it's like, well, where's that in the Bible? But it's like the meat of the story is the same, but then there's other, or like David when he goes after. Did you finish it? I don't want to spoil it for you. Okay, so David when he goes after Goliath, Goliath throws a spear and he makes contact. It's like, well, that's not in the scriptures. It's like, well, but is it probable, and does it create a great sequence, you know, and that sort of stuff. So I think people have issue with I wouldn't say they have issue with the theology of it as much as there has to be a fill-in of the story to create character development and all this backstory.
Yeah, I mean, if for a movie, you would have to have that.
Yeah.
I don't see a huge problem with that, as long as you're not introducing some heresy.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah,
we're gonna add the part where the aliens come down to David.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that didn't happen.
Give them the thing. Yeah, no, I think it was interesting. Yeah, they go deep into David's backstory and David's mom and this whole thing. And,
yeah, that was early on. I remember that.
Yeah. I thought it was a great show. I thought House of David is like the show that I want as a dude, where it's violent, but it's like it's sentimental. It has a great story. It kind of checks all those boxes for me in terms of a series that I enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, I think Christianity has been, in the last few hundred years in the West in general, and this is even in the realm of Orthodoxy, like people have been very sold on pacifism and not being, masculine and not having self-defense, these kinds of attitudes that, I mean, well, King David should be a model, like, you know what I mean? Like there are biblical archetypes for different types of people, you know what I mean? So if you're a father and you have a household, you want an archetype of that kind of a warrior to look up to. And even in the history of Christianity, I mean, you have plenty of Christian kings who live virtuous lives, very famous Serbian Orthodox kings that we think are saints. So there's a long tradition of the warrior saint, which I think we need to recover in the West, because we've been sold through liberalism, modernism, postmodernism, this idea that Christianity is synonymous with pacifism and, just nonsense, which is liberalism was one of the first things it pushes is pacifism, and that emasculates the culture in the society.
Would you connect that to Christians being afraid to lean into the institutions and lean into Hollywood and lean into creativity and lean into media, meaning that a lot of times it seems like there's been an exodus from these arenas? And yes, I get it. Like if you're in Hollywood, it's probably very difficult up until recently to make something you're pumped on or to participate on a project you're pumped on. But do you think that that's added to it? Like leaving the institutions, leaving the media, the entertainment, the arts, when we used to drive all those things?
Yes. I mean, I think unless you are willfully choosing a monastic life, then you're called to be in the culture. And both are options, right? It's just like Paul gives the option. Like if you would like to remain single, you can do that, but it needs to be something you can do, and it needs to be a gift that you have, and you need to demonstrate that. And if you want to go live in the monastery and do that, but even the people in the monastery, like they create elements of culture that we use, especially in the Orthodox world, right? There's a lot of, iconographers. There's a lot of people who create, candles and, all kinds of stuff. So,
and they're also there to kind of pray for the rest of the folks that are in the world.
Exactly. And Chrysostom talks about, St. John Chrysostom talks about, married people living in the world and needing to be involved in the culture. So yeah, I think we have a role, a duty to be involved in that. And that's, the whole history of the church has always said that.
It's and both.
Yeah. And at Nicaea, for example, there was an early debate in the church about, could you be a soldier and be a Christian? Because you had a faction of the early church that said, kind of the way that like Roger Williams and sort of like some of the Rhode Island Baptists thought, you have to eschew all government service because for whatever reason, he thought government was like evil. Like Satan created the government or something, right? And some of the early pre-Nicene Christians thought that too, right? So they were also
under Roman occupation, and
you could see why. Yeah, you could see why they would think that. Yeah, and so when Nicaea happens, one of the issues that comes up, it's in the canons. If you read the canons of Nicaea, is the question of, can a Christian be a soldier? And the council says yes, you can still be a soldier, and they cite, what John the Baptist says to the Roman soldiers, don't be abusive to people, and collect the right amount of tax, don't like steal from people.
Yeah.
If you couldn't be a soldier, John the Baptist would have said, you need to stop being a soldier.
Right.
So.
Yeah. No, that's good. I think pacifism is connected to a fear of culture, and a fear of culture is connected to a complete wasting away of culture without anyone there being the light. I'm also empathetic to people that are like, well, dude, it sucks trying to be the light, but I'd say up until the last couple years, where now if you're like, a bunch of my buddies are in music, right? And there's some of the biggest streaming artists on Spotify, some of the biggest touring artists, like doing arenas now, right? I got some buddies that are doing stadiums now, and they are more or less on their own. They don't have to operate within any major label machine.
You don't want Milli Vanilli?
Milli Vanilli is one, yeah. Lucian Grange isn't involved. Universal isn't involved. Like these mega conglomerates aren't telling them what to make, and they're more successful than their secular counterparts, right? So I was mentioning this to Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you know who Phil Wickham or Brandon Lake are, but their next tour, they're literally hitting stadiums on their next tour, right? And this is like overtly Christian worship music, and they're going from arenas to stadiums. The only other people that are doing stadiums are like A-listers, like Kendrick Lamar, SZA. There's not a lot of folks that are in stadiums. And so Brandon Lake, Phil Wickham, that are more or less, fairly niche artists are transitioning to doing stadiums. Forrest Frank is doing 10,000 people a night in arenas. This is outstreaming the bigger hip hop artists, the bigger pop artists. This is outperforming their ticket sales. And it's happening right now on the back of this decentralized revolution that's happened.
The same thing's happening, I think, in every area of the arts, right? Like, podcasting,
right?
Doing your own media, right? Like, people don't want the degeneracy on the whole. I think most people want the return to wholesome, and so that's why it's working.
Do you think the return to wholesome is because people are returning to Christ, or do you think the return to wholesome is because this like yearning inside of us that maybe we don't even know why we want something different?
All the above. St. Augustine said that, we have a hole in our heart that is infinite until God fills that hole. So I think at a macro level and at an individual level, the society also wants what we have. So it's just natural to move in that direction.
Yeah. I was listening to C.S. Lewis on Near Christianity, and he said something similar where he said the idea that there is a yearning for something beyond what we have. So like you'll enjoy the food you're anticipating. You'll enjoy the sex in your marriage. You'll enjoy the pleasure, but it's still fleeting, and there's something beyond this.
Right.
And he's like, that's an indication that there's something beyond this world, and there's something beyond. And he goes on to make the claim that those who are actually heavenly minded end up making the most earthly impact, Because if you're thinking of a world beyond this world, you're going to make a bigger impact on this world. If you're only thinking about this world, you're not going to make an impact on this world, which is kind of paradoxical.
It's the opposite of like what the Marxists say, right?
Yeah.
The Marxists say that the only way to make an impact is to forget this non-existent beyond. You have to secure your here and the now. So it's a reverse, right? The atheistic Marxist versus like what Lewis talks about.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, you said Hollywood has predicted the end of the world. Participating in that alchemy ritual working, culminating in a synchromatic self-fulfilling prophecy. In your new book that's coming out in July, you go deep on this idea of Armageddon and the prediction of the end of the world across multiple Hollywood films. Unpack some of that for me on why do you think there's this prediction happening? Why is there this fascination with the end days? And how is it different than the biblical account?
It's very different, although ironically, kind of like what you're saying with this yearning for the beyond that we all kind of have, even if you're not a believer or if you're, an atheist, you still have this craving for something more than the here and the now. I think there's an implicit sense in all of us as well that everything has a beginning, middle, and an end. So your life has a beginning, middle, and end. Conversations have beginning, middle, and end.
We're in that middle-age stage, Jay. You and me.
Your life has a middle age, right? And so I think when people make movies and you do stories, you're limited in terms of the basic patterns. You can interject all kinds of infinite variations of characters and details, but there's only so many kinds of stories that you can do. Even if you tell a story out of time, like Tenet or something, like there's still a beginning, middle, and end. And the focus of that third book towards the end of it is not just the end of the world, but I thought it was very providential that when I wrote the first book in 2016, and it's almost 10 years later, like how much things have changed since 2016. I don't think in 2016 people were thinking the old legacy Hollywood system could come to an end, the studio system. Now, granted, it's not perfect. Like it's now going to be like the big tech companies like Amazon and Apple Studios, but the old system is kind of dying out, and it promoted and used so much toxic, degenerate stuff to destroy the culture by design. In fact, Edward Bernays is one of the most famous propagandists. In his book Propaganda, he said Hollywood is the greatest engine of propaganda the world's ever seen. And I cited that in the first book. And then here we are 10 years almost later for the third book. And it's emblematic that Hollywood is having its own apocalypse. So I thought it would be fitting to write on the Hollywood apocalypse films. So I'm trying to playing on, dual senses there. But so I covered like Rosemary's Baby and a lot of the influence that the satanic subculture had at that time in the 60s on Roman Polanski, who himself was involved in some pretty nasty stuff. I won't say what, but he can't come to America, put it that way. So because of what he was involved in. But so you've got that. You've got other apocalypse films that John Carpenter did, which I think are a little more positive in terms of their critique of the dystopia and the end of the world. They're kind of dark, but they're also, maybe you could say pseudo-Christian or almost Christian in their themes. You have, the notion of virtuous sacrifice and overcoming, Antichrist, that kind of stuff. And then I get into some of the, more ridiculous stuff that Hollywood's put out, like The Omen and that kind of stuff, which loosely references biblical end time stuff, but very, very much twists it into something maybe almost neo-Gnostic, like we talked about earlier. So it's interesting because a lot of the occultists, like Crowley, they actually like the Book of Revelation. They don't believe.
I'm sure they do,
but they don't believe. Yeah, they don't believe in it as the Christian perspective. They argue, oh, this is a secret Gnostic text that you need like a code, and my cult will give you the code to decode it. Yeah. So they believe that it's actually a ritual working that you can invoke Babylon, the harlot, into time and space to achieve the end time. And Crowley himself thought he was the beast of the book of the Book of Revelation, and he would make his girlfriends his consort harlot. So the beast and the bride of the beast, the harlot, right? Revelation 17:18. I mean, it's crazy, but he had that view.
Yeah.
And then a lot of occultists after him who follow his work. He's very influential, like all the way down to like Jay-Z. Like all these people are very into Crowley, right?
Yeah.
So they think, oh, I can, participate in the invocation of Babylon. If you remember, my wife put this in her book, when Katy Perry did the halftime show. Yeah, she rode out on a giant beast. So it was like the woman rides the beast, right? It was intentional, like apocalypse symbolism.
Yeah. Well, what's his name? I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy who directed the Rihanna Umbrella video, which is all pretty upbeat and bubbly, like this happy bubbly song, Rihanna's big first hit, just recently came out and like said, yeah, Jay-Z asked me to put these Illuminati type symbols in the video. Yeah. And so some of it he said was accidental, like he had her in a triangle and she was like boxing. He's like, that was like accidental. But he's like, this other stuff was that like he asked me to do this. And his theory was more or less he's trolling. He's just trying to stir up controversy, get people talking to kind of lean into this whole thing of like this mystique that he was trying to build for himself and his artist. But like much like my buddy Shane Smith, who started trolling with Satanism and we're just atheists trolling God and Christianity, and then it starts to potentially get a hold of you. Right.
Yeah. I think in the world of the pop stars, we've seen that for a long time. In fact, we were just watching some old Madonna stuff from like the early 2000s. If you watch her, the song that she did for Die Another Day, the James Bond movie with Pierce Brosnan, if you watch that music video, like it's full of like Kabbalistic ritual invocations, like literally. And she's got like Kabbalistic texts written. I had a friend who knows Hebrew, and he was like telling me all the what the inscriptions say because it's written in Hebrew. But Madonna famously in the 2000s came out and said, "Oh, I'm an actual Kabbalist."
Yeah, she's practicing Kabbalah. Yeah. Is it Kabbalah or Kabbalist?
Well, if you believe it and practice it, you are a Kabbalist. But what you're practicing is Kabbalah.
Yeah, right? And that's like a Jewish
medieval
sect.
Jewish mysticism, but if you read Gershom Scholem, who's kind of the ultimate Kabbalist scholar of the last century, he just says Kabbalah is Gnosticism. It's Jewish Gnostic philosophy, theology. So it's equivalent and very synonymous with Neoplatonism too. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, so in other words, you can go back to when nobody was in, 2002, 2003 thinking about this stuff like we do nowadays. Like, what's that symbol mean in that video? Like they were putting it in the videos, back then. And we've retroactively kind of gone back through a lot of those music videos. And I want to be nuanced because like you said, it's not like every artist and every, cinematographer making the videos is like, we got to pack everything. So like, it'll be both, right? There could be accidental things. And I also think some of these people might even tap into things that they don't even understand. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people are doing drugs. A lot of people are doing LSD. A lot of people are getting inspiration from avenues that can be a demonic influence. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's very prevalent, right? People tapping into other stuff. I've never done any of those harder drugs that like I've just smoked weed, but would you say because you said you've dabbled in LSD and that was the thing
I did LSD like maybe 5 times.
And
I
you said,
had a bad trip once.
Was the bad trip which led you to faith, or was it a good trip that led you to faith? Because I remember you talked about earlier.
It was, I mean, it was a factor. It wasn't like I had a bad trip and then the next day I was at church. It was like I had a bad trip and it was a really dark experience.
And the darkness is what pushed you to the light.
It was a factor that got me on that path.
Gotcha. Right? Yeah. Interesting. I would hope that more people would go your route with experimenting with that sort of stuff.
Well, actually, a lot of people who I've met in the last 5 years that have come into Orthodoxy, they came from the psychedelia, DMT, Joe Rogan world. They came into Orthodoxy.
What do you think that is? Do you think that's is that your mind having a chemical trip, or do you think it's actually opening you up to a spirit realm, like the real spirit realm?
I hate to keep saying both, but I think it's both.
You think it's both? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think it's always both, or do you think for some people it is just a chemical happenings inside of their physical frame?
Yeah. It's a hard question because I've actually tried to study this some on an academic level. There's a good book written, I forget the guy's name, but it's an Oxford Press book on the history of shamanism. And in that book, the guy argues that we can't, I think Jordan Peterson even says the same thing. We can't say that it's totally mental because there's a consistent pattern that most people in discrete shamanic traditions across the world, they have an actual pattern to their trips, to their journeys. And if it was all purely subjective or a mental creation, you wouldn't necessarily see these sorts of patterns, which suggests that there is some architecture or some realm that has some reality to it, ontologically speaking, that people are tapping into. And then separate from when I was reading that book on shamanism, I was reading some of the Orthodox saints and elders talking about the same idea that when you go into these dissociative states or these ultra consciousness states, there are patterns and regularities that suggest that it's more than just a pure mental creation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay. So ironically, you mentioned this earlier, Hollywood consistently predicting the end and in their apocalyptic stories, indirectly or directly maybe, has led to the end of Hollywood as we know it. And with media being decentralized and with, you said there's kind of like this reorganization of the conglomerates, you know, Apple, Amazon, kind of becoming the new Hollywood, if you will. Do you feel like Hollywood's dead?
Yeah. In fact, you know, one of our good buddies, Jamie Kennedy, the comedian guy who's did Jamie Kennedy Experiment and tons of classic movies, Alby's Most Wanted. Like, we've done a couple live shows with him, and he comes and does stand up. The first interview we did with him, he was like, "Hollywood's dead, dude. Hollywood's dead." So our first interview was like, that's the first thing he says, and I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, it's dead. It's like it's all, you know, what we're doing.
Yeah,
that's the future."
Huh.
So you got people in Hollywood, been there since the 90s, you know, doing, well, back in the 2000s, A-list movies. But yeah, I think Hollywood predicted its own demise by pushing an antichrist message and philosophy, which is ensuring your own apocalypse. You know what I mean? It's
the irony.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, you talked a bit about like your comedy live events.
Mm-hmm.
You said Jamie Kennedy, was that one of those? Two of those.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like I've just seen the stuff you showed me on your phone and on Instagram, but it sounds like you guys are creating content that's very interesting because you're talking about esoteric Hollywood, you're talking about philosophy, you're talking about orthodoxy, you're talking about Christianity, theology, you're debating Muslims, but then you have these live events where you're kind of infusing this,
right? Where
you're doing music. Is it cringecore? Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Comedy.
Yeah.
Like a live podcast type of thing, and lectures.
Yeah.
Tell me about those and kind of what made you guys go, man, we should consider doing in-person gatherings.
We kind of joked about doing live stuff a few years ago, but I didn't really think that I had the audience yet to do it. And then I have to give credit to Sam Tripoli, the stand-up, because he was like, "Dude, you got to do live." And I was like, I never thought about that. And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Just go rent out, you know, an event space for 100, 150 people, sell tickets, and have people come and, you know, just do your talks live." Mm-hmm. And yeah, he was spot on. He nailed it. He's been doing stand up for 20 years, so he's, you know, he knows the vibe of live stuff. And I was a little iffy about it just because I've never done a live event before. And then so we did our first one in Nashville last year, and it was awesome. Like, we had all of our, you know, hardcore devoted, you know, fans and followers show up. And it's just like a big party basically. And the way we structure it is like, I open it up. It's an all day event. So basically from like 2 or 3 in the afternoon until, you know, 9 or 10 at night. Right. So you're getting your money's worth, $40, $50 ticket. It's not just me, but it's also Jamie does, my wife does a talk. And then usually what we've done is have a guest with us. So depending on what city we're in. So if we're in LA, we get somebody like Jamie Kennedy. If we're in Austin, we get other stand-ups or comedians there to come out and do it. And then I do a talk on whatever the book is this year. I usually tie it into, like you said, spirituality, Orthodox theology, geopolitical, conspiracy, quote unquote, topics, film, Hollywood, all of it is tied in. Yeah, and it makes for like a whole, you know, day-long party. We have book signing at the end, merch, all that stuff. Everybody loves it.
And is the comedy aspect that you do, is it like stand-up? Is it written? Are you writing your jokes out word for word? Is it more improv? Tell me what that's like.
It's pretty much improv. I mean, I do have some kind of, you know, set stuff that I do, but like so we do a little crowd work, and then a lot of it's impressions. I do like 50 impressions. And
would you do an impression?
Maybe.
Okay.
If you guys are nice to me.
All right.
So there's a lot of impressions we've done, and then we do the music, the songs. So most of the songs are kind of improv.
Okay.
And that just happened because I was doing live streams, and people were like, "Hey, why don't you play some royalty-free music in the background?"
Yeah.
So I was doing it just kind of to have music in the background.
Sure.
And then like I started rapping, I started singing, and it was so dumb that everybody loved it. So people started clipping it, and I was like, why don't I just make this into like a song, right? So then we started doing songs, and it's just another little niche pivot thing that we have. So
that's so interesting. Yeah, we've been talking about doing live stuff. So we talked a lot about it last night, but I've been really intrigued by that. And ultimately, like, I think what's cool about what you do is that you don't allow yourself to be pigeonholed to one thing. So the live events aren't just one thing. They're kind of all encompassing.
Yeah. We don't really have debates. I mean, we do Q&A usually because a lot of people want to have like, I want to ask you a question about this book or that book.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of Q&A, but I've only done one live debate, which is, odd because we've done so many debates over the last 8 years. But and that was because I got invited to debate, three-way debate, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox. So, but yeah, except for debate, it's everything else that we do. So movies, comedy, all
What's the demographic of the folks that are showing up to this? Like what ages, backgrounds?
Usually it's, I would say 20 to 45. And mostly people who are married with kids. Mm-hmm. So a lot of young couples. When you go to a lot of Orthodox churches, like they're dominated by young people and their kids. So I think we've seen a huge influx in the Orthodox world of people in our demographic audience niche. Not as many girls. I mean, we do get some females, but my audience is like 10% female, 90% dudes. Mm-hmm.
Which YouTube tends to skew heavily towards dudes in general.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very male-dominated platform,
But yeah, like I would say probably 30% of the audience is 30 to 40 is Orthodox, 30 to 40 maybe Hollywood conspiracy interested people.
Okay.
Especially if we do it in LA. That's a lot of movie crowd people. And then like 30-40% Alex Jones audience.
Okay.
So,
okay. That's interesting. And how long have you been doing stuff with Alex Jones?
I got invited on in 2020 to be a guest, and they really liked the segment. And
was this remote or was this in person?
The first one was remote.
Okay.
And then the producer was like, "Yeah, that was a really great segment. We're looking, would you like to do a 4th hour host as a test?" So I did that for a few weeks, and then I just got a regular spot of Friday hosting for the last 5 years. And that helped grow the audience a lot. And Alex has been super cool. And we've done several in studio like specials and reports and all that over the last 5 years. But the last couple months, because of his legal issues with them trying to shut down InfoWars, there have been no 4th hour hosts. So all the 4th hour hosts were kind of paused because it's in limbo as to what's going to happen in InfoWars. So.
I thought he rebranded. Like I thought, wasn't the Onion bought InfoWars?
That was not true.
That was not true.
No.
That's actually kind of funny that the Onion buying InfoWars is
and then they just kept saying that they had. But it's still like in legal limbo because it keeps going back and forth between, I don't know all the legalities, but it's right now it's technically in limbo. So it keeps going to the judge, and the judge has to like sift through.
Are they making him sell InfoWars?
That's what they're trying to do.
Okay.
He's already set up the backup, Alex Jones Network.
Yes.
But he doesn't necessarily, he's not yet lost InfoWars per se.
Got it.
But they're still trying to get it.
Where would you put him in terms of the category or the spectrum of like serious conspiracy theorists that's citing stuff like you are versus like more of a pop surface level conspiracy?
I have to give Alex credit because I started listening in 2003 to Alex, and he was the one that was citing all of these texts that I was kind of skeptical when I first heard him back then. Mm-hmm. And that led me to go and pick out all the texts he would reference, and I would just read them all. And so one of the things I do on my channel is what I call a Global Elite lecture series. Mm-hmm. So I literally lecture through these like massive, like 1,300 page tomes that no one else has time or energy to read, like Tragedy and Hope. Mm-hmm. So Alex would talk about this book for years, and I finally decided, okay, I got to get it and read it. Mm-hmm. He's one of the top geostrategists for our oligarchical elite. He was Bill Clinton's mentor. Mm-hmm. And so I went through this whole thing, and somebody said, hey, why don't you just do lectures on these books? Mm-hmm. That way it's sourced. It's not theorizing. It's not speculation. Mm-hmm. It's literally just grounded in the sources.
Yeah.
So I would say absolutely Alex knows his stuff. Nobody's infallible. He's gotten some things wrong.
Sure.
But I have too.
Yeah. So would you think with regards to the Sandy Hook thing, that was just a thing he just kind of struck out on?
I think what he did was he would have people on that were all views, like totally denying it, saying it was real, but it was a conspiracy, saying that there was no conspiracy. So he would have an open debate, and there were a couple people that they didn't really vet very well, like not Alex, but like some of the team just didn't vet the people coming on very well. And those people ended up kind of being sus, I guess you could say, very sort of shady characters who were making a lot of outlandish claims. So when the trials were happening, if you watch some of the legal proceedings on like the long crime channels or whatever, that's what they were bringing up. Like, why did you not vet these people calling in and doing this and that? So that was the grounds for, at least, I think there was 3 cases. And one of the cases is what I saw. But so I think there was a failure on some of the team to vet.
Okay.
But Alex, I mean, you probably like big name people have a team.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like they come in and do the show, and you've got the people that are supposed to
come in. So it's more so like the researchers and the people they allowed to influence his frame of that situation failed him
to vet.
And he doesn't do all of his own research per se. And in that's why he made some of the statements about it being crisis actors and it's all fake and all this stuff is real.
There was a main dude, and I don't want to get like too,
sure,
but he was calling in often and really pushing that line.
And that influenced Alex.
And that's what led to you're promoting this on your big platform.
Yeah. Man, that's crazy. That's interesting. It's interesting to hear a take like that, because usually it's just like, dude, this dude just kind of jumped all the way out the window and said some crazy stuff about.
Well, he walked it back after.
I know he walked it back.
Even right after, there was like some heat back in 2013.
Yeah.
And he kind of walked it back and was like, "Look, I'm just giving a platform to everybody. It's a radio call-in show, right? So people call in and say all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Well, they played the clips of him making the statements, which you're saying is influenced by the people that called in and some of their sources. I only ask for Alex Jones, one, because your connection. I have a buddy whose daughter was at Sandy Hook when it happened. And I knew him back then while they were going through it. And I know the amount of counseling she had to go through and how damaging that was to their family, lost teachers, lost friends. And so hearing anyone say like this wasn't real when I know people directly connected, I was like, man, it's a bad look for anyone to be propagating this sort of stuff.
I think what happens is that when you start to read a lot of this kind of stuff, and if you don't stick to like the source material, like I'm talking about, like what happens is you can develop a kind of a gut reaction to see everything one way. And in logic, there's 2 fallacies that are very closely associated. One is the gambler's fallacy. The other one is Texas sharpshooter fallacy. So like, for example, if I roll a dice and let's say I roll it twice and I get a 3 both times, there's no logical necessity that I'm going to get a 3 the next time I roll it, right? And it's called the gambler's fallacy because humans have a tendency to want to easily interpret. If let's say that there was an event where, just for the sake of argument, let's say the government was involved in a false flag. And then you had another event where the government was involved in a false flag. And then let's say it was verified, right? Because those do exist, right? The Gulf of Tonkin, sinking of the Lusitania, those are known, admitted false flags, Northwoods operation documents. But let's say another event happens and we don't yet know what's going on or the details. Human nature has a tendency to just assume, well, that one will also be the same as these, you see. But there's no necessity necessarily to that event being a false flag because
your brain is recognizing the pattern.
Exactly.
And so you're like, oh, there's this happened. So and to his credit, he has been right on quite a few things. Right. And so you're seeing these things that you're right about. So then this also has to be that because it fits some of the similar categories. And then the Texas sharpshooter fallacy is what you just kind of throw out a bunch of things, something sticks, and therefore you think you hit your bullseye, exactly. Right? You moved is that what it is?
Yeah, you move the target to say, well, see, I got it right here.
Yeah.
But you're ignoring the other,
Right.
Data that doesn't conform to it.
Yeah.
So it's selective data analysis, right?
Yeah.
To conform to what you want to be the truth, or what you assume is the truth. Exactly.
Do you think there's any correlation to just his mindset of going so deep in this stuff that perhaps distorted his lack of logic and reasoning abilities that got him into this mess? Meaning, like, you're so immersed, like people that are chronically online, they're so immersed into a specific subgenre or a specific culture, subculture, and then you start losing the ability to logic and reason.
Yeah, to a degree, although I mean, I think, Alex probably had other stuff going on at the time. I think he was getting divorced.
He wasn't very healthy either. He was pretty overweight.
I mean, there could be all kinds of things going on that partially influenced some of that. But I also think that, like I said, like in terms of human nature, like anybody, all of us are that way. Like if somebody, say, came presenting counter narratives or information to orthodoxy, right? Like my initial reaction is going to be to run to all the data that backs up orthodoxy. That's just how we are as humans. So I think that everybody has an innate sort of just aversion to their paradigm being challenged. We're all that way.
Yeah.
And if, like you said, if you are always constantly studying this information from a kind of conspiracy perspective, you can definitely develop tunnel vision, and it could lead to those types of errors.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just looking up, this happened 12 years ago. So he was like late 30s. So I like you said, all of us are susceptible to it. But if you're dabbling with alcohol, going through personal stuff, dealing with maybe some substance abuse issues,
I think he was getting divorced.
Yeah, you're probably more susceptible to really slide into. It's just crazy if and how this fleshes out. I mean, what a crazy $1 billion stupid tax in a way. We're like, man, that's a lot. And I could understand how he can end up in that situation, but that's a massive price to pay to try and then figure out how to pay these people, and if he's going to pay them, and if he's going to have to sell it or not sell it. Like, it's just a mess.
I mean, I think there's limits. So I think the $1 billion thing was like a media.
So it's not really that.
No.
Oh,
there's like limits in both states.
Do you know the limit?
It's in the millions. I don't remember.
It's in the millions.
Yeah. So
I mean, if it's in the millions, and it's not $1 billion, he could probably figure out a way to pay it, right?
I mean, they had auditors come in and audit everything, and because there was a guy who claimed that Alex had like tens of millions of dollars stashed or something that was hidden in the company or something, but they never found any of that. And so if you don't have the money, like they can't get it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's no debtors prisons in America as far as I'm aware. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. So our very own Zach Sparazzo's brother actually saw one of your videos about the Mahdi and said you've done some coverage on it. And we just covered the Mahdi, and they responded to us, his cult podcast, the official religion website, YouTube responded to us. In your coverage of the Mahdi, what do you make of the guy? You think he's a method actor? You think he's sick in the head? You think he's tapping into some actual demonic forces that are potentially helping him do these miracles that he's alleged of doing? What do you make of it?
It's funny you say that, because the first thing I noticed was the airbrush image of himself. It looked like DJ Khaled.
DJ Khaled,
who is that in the background?
Without any gray in his beard, by the way. Right, it's just like he looks removed, 10 years younger in that.
I mean, I think first of all, it's preposterous, like on the surface. And then you notice it's like a weird, he's got these icons around him that look kind of Catholic, kind of Orthodox. And then he's got a giant bust of some dude that looks like a Caesar bust, but looks like an accountant.
I thought it was Phil Jackson, the Lakers basketball coach.
Exactly. It looks like, I was like, why do you have a bust of like an accountant or Phil Jackson there? So weird aesthetics going on. And then why are you wearing a beanie? And then he actually gave an explanation of the beanie, which I thought was funny.
That's hilarious, because he's connecting with the working man.
Exactly.
You said that was Zach Sparazzo's job.
Right, yeah, with that jean. He's got full jeans, right?
He has his Canadian tuxedo
jean
on.
Shoes over there. He's got jean socks, dude. But could you imagine jean socks? Dude, you should
I'm sure they exist.
Dude, get some jean socks that say "Bless God" on it. Right?
I just might. Coming over great
working class right there, dude. The other thing that was weird about him, which is like all cult leaders, you notice, because we did a bunch of podcasts on Osho back in the day, and it's like they're on pills or something.
Something.
They're like, he's like this and he doesn't move, and he's like, I am the Mahdi, and then he talks really slow. I found this clip of Osho where he's talking about, man, I am drunk right now, dude. He literally says that in like, he's like with a huge crowd.
So you think he's medicated?
Man, I am drunk. He looks medicated and out of it. But
how about that 9-foot stage where he's like hovering
like,
over right. Like this?
I noticed in Cameron's video too, he did a really good, Cameron Bertuzzi, when he did the breakdown of like his background and the Arab Spring stuff is a huge red flag because he was a mega activist in the Arab Spring, which if you go into the history of Arab Spring, it's promoted by Western intelligence. There's a great book that deals with some of that, Full Spectrum Dominance by F. William Engdahl, really good book. Good introduction to geopolitical stuff from an academic perspective if people are interested. Because I get asked all the time, where should I start? That one's a good one to start. But I think that it's also a clear engineered mix of perennialism, Neoplatonism, all of which I've read and studied pretty extensively, and Shia stuff. And Shia Islam is very amenable to Sufism, very close to Sufism, which is Neoplatonism. And the advantage of Neoplatonism is that it's kind of a skeletal thing that allows you to pick and choose from the world religions. And that way you can say, oh, look, all these world religions, they're actually my superstructure Neoplatonic religion. And you're all just manifestations of kind of the pieces that I have as the full picture. And a lot of cults do that. A lot of religious movements are clever enough to latch onto that. So I think it's definitely some kind of engineered, whether he's fully involved or somebody else in the background. I think it's very sus, and I think there's probably some intelligence background, especially with Arab Spring.
For real, you think he might be a CIA agent?
Well, I don't know about CIA, but it's very likely that it could be something like that.
Wow. Yeah. The Arab Spring stuff was weird. We talked about that a bit too. That's a tail sign that something's going on.
Something in the background.
Yeah. And so what would be would the intelligence connection be a correlation or causation to what he's doing now?
Again, just going on gut analysis, spending a lot of time studying cults and religions and the overlap with intelligence stuff, because they have a lot of interest in cults and religions. In fact, I might even write my next book on religion and intelligence. Okay. We've done a lot of lectures in the last few years on that specific subject matter because very few people go into that. People don't know that the state has a vested interest in wanting to make churches forms of what's called soft power. And soft power is a way to, if you're the state or if you're a superpower, to extend your influence in other cultures through non-kinetic warfare. So you're doing it not with guns and tanks per se, but with culture. Hollywood has been a very powerful engine of Western soft power. You know, I mentioned writing about James Bond in the Cold War. Bond was a form of projecting Western soft power to other nations in the Cold War, right? So you've got these Soviets, they're tyrannical, they want to lock you down. James Bond represents, Western masculinity, capitalism, free love, all these kinds of things that Bond is supposed to represent. So likewise, intelligence agencies are very interested and have always been interested in cults and religions. Crowley was a spy, as we said. Many New Agers. Madame Blavatsky, there's really good. She's the mother of all the New Age movements. There's a lot of good evidence to suggest that she was also a spy. She worked with the KGB. One of her handlers was actually a KGB guy. So I think that it's very possible. It's very likely. I don't know for sure, but the Arab Spring activism definitely suggests a possibility there. There have been a lot of connections between the CIA that not many people know about and like Shia and Sufi movements. CIA's made a lot of contacts with Shia movements. You can look into the history of the Naqshbandi, and they were relevant because they were involved in drug trafficking. I'm not saying that this dude is connected to the Naqshbandi or these orders, but in situations like the Cold War, a lot of times the Western intelligence operatives found it beneficial to make alliances with Muslims for the purpose of fighting Soviets. So like the most famous example is 1979 Soviet conflict, where Brzezinski and Carter, Robert Gates, they all openly wrote about and strategized to use Al-Qaeda against the Soviets. And so they armed them, they funded them. It's called Operation Cyclone, well known, it's declassified. In fact, Max Blumenthal wrote a really good recent book on this subject matter called, I'm not paid to promote anybody, I just have these with me. So his book's really good, Management of Savagery, which is Western support for certain Islamic sects. And that can be Sunni, sometimes Shia, and even can be cults and weird groups like we're talking about with this guy. Now, not proven, just my assessment.
Just based on your gut and just kind of understanding some of the background.
The way that a lot of this stuff usually works,
Yeah, and then they kind of putting him in motion, and or do you think they're still currently supporting him in some way, shape, or form?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just just looking at the background and the red flags that usually pop up with these kinds of mouthpieces for this kind of stuff. I mean, I don't think every cult is run by a spy agency, but you'll notice certain red flags that pop up where there's a likelihood of that. Like Scientology. I don't want to get you in legal trouble with Scientology, but like they have a long time connection with, for example, Russia and other countries have banned Scientology and Jehovah's Witnesses because they're pretty well-known covers for espionage.
Really?
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses, though?
And Mormons.
Wow.
Yeah.
What?
Mm-hmm. It's well-known, yeah.
That's crazy. What is the how well-known and what is the evidence?
What Russia openly says, because these are...
They say, but I mean, like, what evidence do they have to, like, verify that?
Well, that's when you'd have to go into, like, a lot of spy biographies and, like, histories of espionage and connections that the Western intelligence agencies have had, not just with, like, certain groups of Islam, but with religion in general. I mean, if you think about it from the vantage point of the state, like, you want to be using any means that you have at your disposal. And so if you've got a ready-made bunch of people who are activists or missionaries are a classic spy cover. Not saying all missionaries are spies. It's just a classic. I mean, USAID, Red Cross, these are classic covers for various types of espionage activity. For example, I shared an old article that's on the CIA website, Covert Action Magazine from 1983, from the CIA's own website, an article about CIA support for one of the evangelical dictators in Latin South America, Mont, M-O-N-T-T. So people are interested, you can go read on my wall. That it should be pretty high up on my wall. But that's one example of just one during the Cold War where the CIA reached out to this guy and said, we want you on board. We're going to raise money for you with Jerry Falwell, Billy Graham. And so the evangelicals raised a lot of money to support this evangelical supposed dictator in Latin South America, Mont, M-O-N-T-T. So that's one case that's admitted. But if you want a book on this, I did a talk from an academic text from University of Florida. His name is Michael Graziano, and he wrote a thesis that was published called Errand into the Wilderness, History of the CIA and Religion. That whole book is about the agency's attitude towards religious movements, particularly in the Cold War, but not exclusively, because there's also a chapter at the end about Iran and Shia Islam. And it's a natural posture, but just people don't know about it, but it's a natural posture for the state to take to try to make alliances with various religious movements.
Interesting.
Let me give you one more example that's declassified that's proof of this. It's called the Doctrinal Warfare Program. A very famous Catholic named David Wimhoff wrote a giant 800-page book on it. It's really good. It's called Time Life Magazine, John Courtney Murray and the American Proposition. It's the name of the book. And it's about the 2013 declassified document, the Doctrinal Warfare Program, which the CIA set up under people like C.D. Jackson to recruit as many Roman Catholic theologians, scholars, and prelates as they could. And we don't know all of them, but we know that John Courtney Murray, the famous Jesuit Americanist philosopher, was in it. We know that to some degree they had Cardinal Spellman involved. But the idea was that it's a Cold War. We got to do whatever we can. So you're going to work with us at every capacity that we need you to help beat the Soviets in the Cold War. The problem, and I agree that like Soviets are bad guys. I'm not pro-communist. But the problem is that now you've made this alliance with the intelligence agencies. Now they have a lot of leverage with you. And if you look into Operation Gladio, another declassified thing that ties into the Vatican Bank, that helps to explain a lot of this as well.
I'm sure this goes the other way too, though. Like we just recently saw the big scandal with, there was a company that was hiring the likes, I think the most prominent name I remember was Tim Pool for Russia, these crazy videos. They're getting paid outlandish amounts to kind of make this like soft Russian-esque propaganda videos. And this happened hugely within the conservative sphere as well.
Well, I know Tim, and I know Tim's always been cool to me. He's always had me on and been very positive. I don't think that I never detected like that Tim wants to push Russian propaganda. So I think what happens in these kinds of situations is that an entity with money and donors reaches out and says, we want to support your media group, we'll give you $10 million. I don't know the background of that situation, but I'd seriously doubt that Tim would be. He's pretty media savvy. I doubt he would be.
It was a third party.
Silly.
It was a third party.
I think, yeah,
so it wasn't directly to Tim.
Yeah.
It was a couple that was running some sort of agency, and this couple was
Right.
being paid. They, I think, were verified to be Russian spies or somehow connected, and they were going out and hiring conservative influencers, speakers, and giving them pretty crazy amounts of money for very low-performing videos.
Yeah, I'm not trying to deny that. Basically, all countries do this.
Yes,
and I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying like China has people that they influence with money and media and operatives. Russia has people. Every country essentially does this to some degree with if they have the capabilities to do so.
Yeah.
So this is just what happens.
Would you feel comfortable putting Tucker's tour of a Russian grocery store in a similar category? He's there. He's surprised. You haven't seen this video? He's like, they have bread. They got this. They got this. And it just seems like straight Russian. Yeah,
That was my Tucker laugh.
Yeah, yeah, he does that. He's like, oh, they got bread. They got this. They got that. And it was like, what are you doing, dude? Like, why are you in Russia grocery shopping to show them that they have better produce than America and it's cheaper?
I love Tucker, so I don't think that he's a Russian operative or anything like that. I think he at least seeks to, in these situations, try to get both sides. I thought his Putin interview was pretty good. I thought he asked really good questions. I don't think it was any kind of like softball thing. I think it was a real valid interview.
Putin spent a lot of time giving us the history.
The history that was it was like a history. It was like a history course, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't see the grocery store thing, so I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah,
but,
it's pretty funny.
Okay.
It's pretty funny. It's just like, come on, like, what do you? I didn't mind the Putin interview. Like, I was like, oh, this is interesting. To try to steelman their paradigm of how they view Ukraine and why they view it as a part. Right. It was like, oh, okay, this is good. But when I saw him shopping in the grocery, my dad. I don't know if you know how much about my background. I grew up in the Soviet Union, so I was Azerbaijan, Armenian. Growing up in Azerbaijan, the Soviets completely let that whole situation go to hell. Massive ethnic cleansing of Armenians from Azerbaijan.
I know about that, yeah.
And then we came to America. My dad was he was working at a restaurant, but he's also kind of like a bootlegger, getting products from all over. Anyway, when we came to America, my mom and my dad split, but he still had a business and still has some form of businesses back in Russia today. And so hearing his perspective today, and he's not a crazy leftist and he's not a far right guy. He's just like a
normal dude.
Yeah, Soviet Union was like, it was all right. Russia now, really bad. And the stuff that they have going on now. So like hearing his perspective and how he's had to manage and navigate dealing with Russia today is like, dude, no, like it's not good.
I had a friend that moved there, took his family there, and they lived there for about a year. And they wanted to try out like living out in the country, like a good ways outside of Moscow. And he said it was the worst part was that he did think there were a lot of people who were serious about their Orthodox Christianity, but the problem was that there's still a lot of the bureaucratic holdover from the Soviet period. So like getting simple things done is a huge ordeal because of all the like paperwork and bureaucracy. And so they ended up moving back, I think, because it was around the time that Putin said, like, anybody who, like, if you're from the West, you have to go back because of the war starting. So he was forced to come back.
Probably in his best interest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I always thought that the ability of governments to influence people and use social media and soft powers is always very fascinating.
There's a great story. There's a movie called Spy. And it highlights like everything that we're talking about. It's about this Nordic. I think she was Swedish. She was like the most famous Swedish actress in the 40s and 50s. Her name was Sonja Wigert. And there's a movie they made about her called Spy. Everybody should watch it because she gets basically compromised and forced by her government to sleep with the tiny mustache man high command. And they had her father arrested. And so they forced her to do it. They were like, we're not going to release your father unless you sleep with these people. And so it ruined her career because everybody thought she was a traitor for Tiny Mustache Man, right? But she was forced into it for her dad. So it shows the complexity of these kinds of situations of like, it's not really good guy, it's just power struggles. It's not good guy, bad guy. I'm not, again, like I'm not for Tiny Mustache Man. I'm not for Soviet communism at all. But you can have problems every way and it's really complex.
Yeah, for sure. Can you put your mic down a little bit so that we can, your face is a little cut off. Okay. For sure. So tell me a bit about, I think a lot of people know you for your debate stuff. Tell me a bit about like, what are the Ortho Bros? What is this Eastern Orthodox community that's online, and what do you make of it in the broader sense, right? Because there seems to be some people that love the world of, I guess, Ortho Bros. I think it's meant as a derogatory term. And then there's like, we're more enlightened with our approach of our faith. Is that a clear distinction? Do you think that that's a fair analysis?
Well, it was like a thing that wasn't planned. It was, you know, in 2016, I got asked to do a debate with a libertarian atheist. So I debated Adam Kokesh. So it was like the first online debate. And it was a bunch of libertarian guys that hosted it and were the moderators. And then that led to, you know, hey, why don't you debate this atheist guy over here? And so I was doing a lot of blood sport debates back in 2017 with Andy Worski on YouTube. And those were kind of unmoderate, halfway moderated, just kind of on the cuff. And this sort of kicked off a debate culture, I guess you could say, on YouTube, which kind of was there with some of the new atheists back in the late 2000s, who, you know, like TJ Kirk and these kinds of people who were kind of doing debates. But it started really ramping up 2016, 2017. So we had a lot of huge name people coming in, start doing debates. And then that turned into, I had a couple friends, one of whom was interested in Islam, but ended up being Christian. And another guy who was atheist but became Orthodox. They started a channel called Orthodox Shahada, which is geared towards opposing Islamic arguments. So they were trying to get me, hey, why don't you start debating Muslims? I don't know anything about Islam other than like I'd read geopolitical stuff, but I didn't know the religion. And so 2017, we started doing a lot of Muslim debates. And then we got more of those, 2018. And then we started debating the sort of big name Muslim people, right?
And this is all virtual primarily?
All online,
all
right?
Yeah.
It just snowballed. Like, it was like an organic, just sort of growing, snowballing thing. That attracted a lot of young people watching these things from YouTube and other outlets, Twitter, et cetera, to start inquiring into Orthodoxy, right? So this kicked off 2017, and there have just been waves of people being interested in Orthodoxy since then. And it was around 2017 when Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, a good buddy of mine, he was actually out here from Anaheim, he made a joke one day. He was like, hey, I'm out here with the Ortho Bros. And it was just him and his
stuck, huh?
And it stuck. But then what happened was mainstream media outlets and like they started doing hit pieces, right? So there was a couple outlets that wrote hit pieces saying that it was like this evil online cult and movement, which is weird because they were arguing, this is right around the time COVID starts, right? So about half the Orthodox world and churches shut down and were doing online e-church.
Wait, there were Orthodox churches doing e-church?
Yeah, about half. I would say about half the Orthodox world.
I honestly thought that was only a Protestant thing.
No, it was no Roman Catholic, and I would say in the Orthodox world it was split.
Totally unrelated. I saw a video today of Saddleback Church, which is one of the biggest mega churches. An instructional video on how to self-baptize yourself.
Somebody sent me that today. Somebody sent me that. Yep.
I legit thought that the Orthodox were just like, nah, we're not shutting down. Like I thought that was
no, it was half
unanimous.
and half.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And it was really just like. It just depended on like the bishop,
sure,
right? Because Orthodox is decentralized, so it's just a bishop. There's no pope or anything. So, but when that happened, it was a weird situation where, there a lot of the people who were opposed to me doing apologetics and debates online, they started saying, "Oh, he's just creating an internet church," which was weird because always from the very get-go we said you have to be involved in the local church. Like you can't. There's no such thing as internet Orthodox. It doesn't exist. So it was a really weird, hypocritical stance for the people who were pushing for the shutting down of the churches, which we always opposed, even during the entirety of CUF. Yeah, I still use the code from 2020, dude. Like the CUF, right? The CUF crisis.
Yeah.
But we were the ones that were always telling me, no, you have to go to church. And like the people who are attacking me saying it's an online cult are saying, oh no, he has an e-cult, but by the way, don't go to church and watch it online. It was just nonsense. Anyway,
and just to be clear, you've said this offline to me. You said that how did you describe it? You said you're not an Orthodox streamer. You're not an Eastern Orthodox streamer. You're a streamer, creator, and author
who's Orthodox,
which I think is a fair distinction to make in terms of your contribution with your books and all the other stuff you've done, but also just your own temperament and how you're probably engaging in these conversations where it doesn't sound like you're trying to be the poster child for Eastern Orthodoxy.
That's what I'm saying. Like all this stuff happened like inadvertently. I started a Discord that was just for my stuff. And that organically grew into like a giant for Discord, like 12,000 people who are just Orthodox community, right? It's so it's the largest Orthodox Discord now.
Okay. How active are you on that thing?
I'm only in there in and out. Yeah. So
we're thinking about shutting down our Discord because we're seldom on it.
I can't keep up with it. Yeah. Like it's too much work. But there's a lot of good dudes and clergy now that run it. Okay. So I gave it off to clergy.
Oh, that's cool.
And so like the way Orthodoxy works, like you've got to have oversight, right? And there's plenty of priests and people out there, the people that are friends of ours, like Father Moses McPherson, his channel's blown up. You've got Father Josiah, you've got plenty of people who are priests doing content now. But that didn't exist in 2017, 18. There was like maybe 2 people, right?
It's cool to see clergy online.
Yeah, exactly.
Like regardless of the stream. Like I think it's the more the better in my opinion.
I would rather them handle that stuff.
Sure.
I don't mind like I don't mind doing an atheist debate or a Muslim debate, but like when it comes to giving spiritual advice or, counseling, I don't do any of that. Like that's not my role.
Why wait until this entire thing premieres on YouTube? Why not sign up for a free 7-day trial of our Patreon community and see this entire interview, as well as all of our interviews, early before they hit the public. And you'll also get access to the extended version of our conversations that are sometimes a little too spicy for YouTube. All right, so head on over to Patreon. Link is in the description or pinned comment. Here's a little preview of what's available on Patreon. So is Orthobros considered a derogatory term? You and Sam have your situation. What was your impression of the debate you had with him as a debate partner on Valuetainment? And then when do you think that devolved to what ended up devolving to, which we'll get into?
We don't make judgments about individuals. And like, I don't know your destiny. I don't know the work of God's Spirit in your heart. I do believe that like the thief on the cross, and I tried to bring some, philosophical internal critiques to the table. And I think it was a blowout because if you go and, it's had multiple millions of views across the platforms. If you go to the Fresh and Fit channel, you can see 40,000-ish comments, 98% Islam lost.
Some of the folks that I see that are coming towards Eastern Orthodoxy seem to have a crippling fear and anxiety around their own salvation.
The argument that you're making violates the very thing that you just said would relativize the positions.
The argument that I'm making right now.
Your argument is no different than anyone else's argument. You're you're saying, I have this position, they have that position, you have your position.
Yeah.
Of course, but that has nothing to do with
Ruslan